I've been working on this for days and trying to do it in this class. I don't want to run over to the next one. But first of all, we've got to talk about John, the writer. When you're studying biblical interpretation, hermeneutics of Scripture, okay, what are the rules of interpretation? You remember?
To whom is he writing?
Who's speaking, number one. To who is he writing, and what's the subject? So, first of all, who's speaking and writing 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John? John, the apostle. All right. Now, let's go back. I'm going to try to... By the way, Sister Andino, you have this book, In Search of the 12 Apostles. I would recommend it to you. My mother bought this for me in 1979. Yeah. And in 9th month, 1979, and I read it and marked it all up, and I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot of things in this little book. It has a lot of research in it. There's a lot of books on the apostles and the disciples of Christ and everything, but it was just a little cheap book, but it's a good one. And I'm going to be quoting from this here tonight. All right. John was one of the sons of Zebedee, a fisherman of Galilee, and of Salome, who was probably a sister of Mary. This is very important. Mary, the mother of Jesus. The mother of Jesus, who grew up in Galilee and was a partner with his brother and with Andrew and Peter in fishing business. All right, so now, do you see how these are all related? Who all is related here now?
Peter and Andrew.
Peter, Andrew, James, okay, and John the Baptist. John the Baptist. All right, so they're all cousins, aren't they? Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
You learned something brand new tonight. Okay? He was a disciple of John the Baptist and the companion of Andrew in following the noted prophet John 1:34 through 40. Now, I know you can't write all this stuff down. I'm just giving you information tonight. He accompanied Jesus on his first tour in Galilee and later with his partners and quit the fishing industry to become a disciple of Christ. He was with Jesus at the wedding in Cana of Galilee when Jesus performed the first miracle when he started his public ministry in John 2:1-11. All right? And was also present in Jerusalem during Jesus' early Judean ministry. We're told that he owned a home in Jerusalem, probably the upper room where they had the Lord's Supper and all of the different happenings that happened there. They took the Passover. All this was probably John's house. All right? Probably the interview with Nicodemus was in John's house also.
Wait. The interview.
Jesus' interview with John.
When Nicodemus came to Jesus as a representative of the Sanhedrin court. Yes. John the 3rd chapter. When he came there, that's the only place it's recorded. He was a representative of the Sanhedrin court, and he came to question Jesus. In the original languages, you see that.
Now, how do they come to the conclusion that it was probably in John's house?
Just by the rest of because John's house was where they did all the other things, so that's probably where he was. Okay? There were two places where Jesus spent a lot of time. John's house and in Bethany. And whose house was that?
Mary,
Martha, and Lazarus. All right. And they were lifetime friends of Jesus also. How many of you knew that? All right. Now with Peter and with James, he was present at the rising of Jairus' daughter in Mark 5:3, and the transfiguration in Matthew 17. They were nearest to the Lord at the agony in Gethsemane. John was therefore one of the most intimate of the disciples. He and his brother were called the sons of thunder. All right. When they sought to call down fire from heaven and the Samaritan village, whose inhabitants had refused them hospitality, Mark 3:17. On another occasion, John exhibited his zeal and intolerance and exclusiveness when he exclaimed, "Teacher, we saw one casting out demons in your name, and we forbid him to do so, because he didn't follow us," in Mark 9:38. Their mother also asks for special places for them in the kingdom, and in Mark 10:35. At the Last Supper, he occupied the privileged place of intimacy because he was next to Jesus, leaning on his chest, in John 13:23. At the trial of Jesus, he was present in the court because he was known to the family of the high priest, probably, and had been a business representative in Jerusalem of his father's fishing industry. and thus became acquainted with many of the prominent people in that area. He was present at the cross, and there was given by Christ the responsibility for his mother, John 19 and verse 26. Now, some of these things you're learning, but we need to get a foundation. This may be a little boring to some of you, but let's go on with it.
It's not, but it would have been nice if it had been written down for us so that we could
Well,
see it.
you can listen to the tape and the CD afterwards. A lot of this stuff, I cannot write it down because it is copyrighted. And that's why I do it like this.
Okay.
This is copyrighted. All right. He was with Peter during the time of Jesus' burial in the tomb and came with him as one of the first visitors to see the empty tomb. His greatest act of faith was when he saw the empty grave closed. For as he tested, he saw and believed, John 20 and verse 8. John was with Peter at the gate of the temple when a lame man was healed, Acts 3 and 10, and he was with Peter on the mission to Samaria to impart the Holy Spirit to the new converts, Acts 8 and verse 12. He, along with Peter and James, the Lord's brother, are called pillars of the Jerusalem church. Many have identified John as a disciple whom Jesus loved, John 19:20, or John 12:23, 19:26, 20 and verse 2, and 21 verse 7 and 20. We learn from the beginning of the gospel that he lived for a long time after the beginning of the Christian era and was the last living apostle. All right. And he went to Ephesus shortly before the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem. And that was AD what?
87.
87. All right. And he had a special relationship to seven of the churches in Asia. There were more than seven, weren't there? Many churches in Asia. But he wrote a letter to them, basically, in the book of Revelation, didn't he? His brother James was the first of the apostles to die. John, on the other hand, was the last to die. And almost all of the other apostles met violent deaths, but John died peacefully in Ephesus at a very old age, probably in 101 A.D. and September the 26th, 101 A.D. All right? And he may have been over 100 years old, because he was probably born in B.C. All right? He was...
So was he the youngest?
What?
Was he the youngest?
Well, some people say Mark was the youngest of all the disciples and the writers. Okay? When he lived in Ephesus, it is believed and recorded by several historians that Mary, the mother of Jesus, lived with him. Now, Mary was his what? She was his aunt, all right? But Jesus gave him direct responsibility of her because Jesus was the oldest son. Evidently, Jesus could see that all of them were going to be killed except for John. So guess who he gave the responsibility of taking care of his mother to? Yeah. All right.
Now, was
Wally
Joseph
says
gone by
he
that
was
time?
there at that house
Yeah.
in Ephesus.
Mm-hmm.
Was Joseph gone by the time of Jesus' death?
Yes. Joseph was evidently, nothing else is spoken of him. He must have died. He was probably 40 or 50 years old when he married Mary. Mary was probably 12 to 15 years old when he married her. All right? Or took her for his wife. All right. Let's go a little further. Mary was taken to Ephesus and died there. There's a tomb in Ephesus. That's Mary's tomb, and there's also one in Jerusalem. But most historical facts say that Mary died in Ephesus. All right? The most foundational known site of John the Apostle's burial is in Ephesus. Matter of fact, that is one of the most sure sites of any historical thing where John was buried in Ephesus.
Now, there was no family tomb for them, was there?
No.
Because recently there had been this furore that they found a box of Jesus' bones in
Yeah.
it. Ridiculous.
Jesus' bones are not here.
They're up in
Jesus
heaven.
is in heaven.
Yeah.
Their bones are with him. Yes.
Do you think they've ever found the shroud of Turin? What is it called? The shroud of
The Shroud of Turin?
Turin? Yeah. Is that really? Did they really find that? Is that a true artifact?
There's all kinds of books about that. I personally do not believe it is his shroud because it's made incorrectly. Simple as that. They wound them around like a mummy, and that one is laid forward and backward. All right? And I don't think God would have let it stay here anyway, because
He wouldn't want it to have been worshipped.
it would have been worshipped. All right? And you're not going to find any of John's bones or clothes or books or anything around. I mean, they know exactly that his site was there, but there's no bones, no nothing. No artifacts in that tomb at all. It's just where he was. Zilch, that's it. Now, Polycarp was a disciple of John, a direct disciple of John, okay? And several times recalls the teaching of John in Ephesus, and says he lived there until the time of Trajan. While in Ephesus, John was exiled to Patmos, a penal colony off the coast of Turkey. And what was Patmos? Salt mine. Yeah. You know the old story, well, I'm going to the salt mines today.
Yeah.
Well, it was a
Place of hard work.
Hard labor. And it says here, according to early tradition, the sacred text of the book of Revelation was given to John and set down while he was in a cave now known as the Cave of the Apocalypse. Now, in one of the movies that I showed, we saw that, and up above that, it was called the Gate of Heaven, remember? The Gate of Heaven. All right. We're going a little bit further.
That's where he wrote Revelation?
That's where he wrote the book of Revelation. All right. And that's probably the last book he wrote. 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John were probably predated even the Gospel. We're going to get along that in just a little bit.
Now, didn't you say that he reluctantly wrote the Gospel of John but felt he had to?
He felt and I'm getting to that just a little bit.
I'm sorry.
All right. All right. He ran into some people that not if. Today, the modern day Gnostics are the Jehovah's Witnesses and your Unitarians and etc. This book is written directly against them. And we're going to get into that a little bit later on, but if you wanted to have a book in the Bible that is written against what the Jehovah's Witnesses believe and these people that don't believe in the divinity or the person of Jesus Christ, it is the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and the book of Revelation, because his theme in all of those books is that Jesus is God eternal. All right? Eusebius records that John was released from Patmos and returned to Ephesus later. But after Domitian had reigned 15 years and Nerva succeeded to the government, the Roman Senate decreed that the honors of Domitian should be revoked. Everything, all the condemnations and the honors that Domitian had were going to be revoked, and those who had been unjustly expelled should return to their homes and have their goods restored. This is the statement of the historians of that day. And it was then also that the Apostle John returned from his banishment in Patmos and took up his abode in Ephesus.
When was that?
When Domitian died.
You don't know what
Okay, I don't know the exact date, but it's real 90 some odd A.D., okay?
He must have been an old man then.
Oh, he was very old then. One of the most interesting stories reported of John is also recorded by Eusebius. After his return from the exile in the island and the death of Domitian, but that he was still living until this time, it may suffice to prove by the testimony of two witnesses. Two historians tell us that he actually lived lived in Ephesus after this period of time. All right, here's another thing that's very important. Remember, we have the prodigal son, the story of the prodigal son. This actually happened to John. John ordained a young man to the ministry and laid hands on him and appointed him as a pastor. Later on, this man went out and he became a robber, an absolute robber and a thief and a killer. John found about it several years later when he came back, and he went and went into the area where this robber and bandit was, and they captured him. And John wanted them to capture him because he said, now take me to your leader. All right? And he got up there, and when the guy saw John coming, he started to run away and was ashamed. And John says, stop. Don't go anywhere further. He said, God wants you, and He can use you. You are still usable by God. And I'm going to pray for you that God will turn you around and will use you even though you've gone astray.
Is that Philemon?
No. That was Paul. When Paul, he Onesimus is who that was.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right. He said, I will cheerfully suffer death for you as Christ did for us, and I will give my life for yours. Say and believe Christ has sent me. Hearing this, at first he stopped with downcast looks, then threw his arms, then trembling, lamented bitterly, embracing the old man as he came up and attempted to plead for himself with his lamentations as much as he was able. And he said, as if he was baptized the second time with his own tears, just immersed in his tears. And he came back to the Lord, and he became a useful pastor. So there we have a true story. And then John was a peaceful man, gentle as a dove, and the disciple, what we call of love. But when it come to heresy, he had no tolerance. No tolerance. Now it says here, if you look this up on page 117, why John wrote the Gospel of John and all of his writing. Of course, it was by inspiration, but this is what impressed upon him. He said that his disciples said that he especially saw the growing need to defend Christ's divinity, and yet that he came in the flesh, that he was really God-man on this earth.
Now, the reason for the Gnostics denying Christ's divinity, was it because he was here in the flesh?
Yes, part of that. But we're going to get into that later in detail.
All right.
Okay? I'm just giving you an overview right now.
Sorry, I'm jumping ahead.
Well, that's all. We're going to get into it. All right? He related the events of the earlier period before John was shut up in prison so that he might be manifest to those who should be diligently read the volumes of the four evangelists. Now, John says that he believed that the other three Gospels left out one very important year. And that's why John, his Gospel, is very... he brings in basically 1 year of Christ's life that the other ones do. No, and we call the Gospels, the four are the three synoptics and the Gospel of John. What synoptics mean?
Overview of his
Seen,
life.
Greek, means together, and optic, eyes, see together. They saw what they saw from their eyes, and they saw it together, but John's Gospel is different. John's Gospel brings a different period of time and some of the things that none of the other Gospels brings out because he said it needed to be put in word and writing.
Well, the very beginning of the book of John tells us that.
Yeah. Jerome, which was the guy that wrote the Latin Vulgate, he wrote about John, and he said that he was carried to his meetings. He had to be carried when he was so old. He was over 100 years old, and that he was carried to his meetings, and that his disciples would weary from him preaching the same thing. He'd say, love one another as Christ loved you. Love one another as Christ loved you. And he'd just tell them this over and over and over again. And this is a poem that was written about him. What say you, friends, that this is Ephesus, and Christ has gone back to his kingdom? Age is so to so, know it all, and yet just now I seem to stand once more upon the native hills and touch my master. Up bear me to my church once more, and there let me tell them of my Savior's love. For by the sweetness of my master's voice, I think he must be very near. So raise up my head, how dark it is. I cannot seem to see the faces of my flock. Is this that the sea that murmurs so, or is it weeping? Hush, my little children. God so loved the world that he gave his Son, so you love ye one another. Love God and men. Amen. That was basically the things that he would say when they would carry him to his pastorate. It talks about the tomb of or John's tomb and says that it was the most proven place of all the disciples, all apostles. John's tomb was it was a fact where it was, but nothing was left there. There are no artifacts in that tomb at all. Now I'm going to quickly read a little bit about what. Now this is a good study guide. The Hebrew Greek Key Study Bible by Spiros Odeotis. By the way, Don Lady. How many of you know Don Lady? Don Lady. This was one of his teachers in the seminary where he went. Don Lady is a 4-year graduate of the seminary. He's one of the Sunday school teachers here at Valley Baptist Church, and he was my student also. John examines the question of whether the person who is born of God can commit sin or not in 1 John 3 and 6. He talks about the difference in being born again and that seed, that which is in us cannot sin, and the flesh sinning. All right? And that was one of the greatest examples that he uses in there. Many things he says, these things, my little children, these things I write unto you, that you might know that you have been saved, that you have been, your sins are forgiven, all these things. These things I write unto you, that you might understand, that you might thoroughly know. And one of the things that John points out is that we have no sin on us. If we're children of God, we have no sin on us, but we do have sin in us. The opposite, Christ has no sin in him, but he has our sin on him. Got rid of that one. These, I have to read it to you, because if I wrote it down, I'd be breaking the copyright, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to get any more trouble than I'm in already. All right. Now, A.T. Robertson says that he believes the Apostle John wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and Revelation, and the book and the Gospel according to John. That's a fact as far as I'm concerned. There's people that disagree with this, but I don't believe them. I believe John. And I believe it is inspired of God. Gnosticism. Here we go. Gnosticism today are the Jehovah's Witnesses, basically. Now let's see what A.T. Robertson says about this. The epistle is not a polemic primarily, but a letter for the edification of the readers in the truth and the life in Christ, and yet the errors of the Gnostics are constantly before John's mind and the reader's attention. The leaders had gone out from among the true Christians. Some people come and join God's churches aren't saved, and they just cause trouble because they're the devils. They're the dirty birds that eat up the seed on the side of the road, and so on and so forth. But there was an atmosphere of sympathy, and that constituted a subtle, dangerous danger. There are only two passages, 1 John 2:18 and 4:1-6, in which the false teachers are specifically denounced. But this unethical intellectualism, Robert Law said, with its dash of Greek culture and Oriental mysticism and licentiousness, gave a curious attraction for many who did not know how to think clearly. John, like Paul in Colossians, Ephesians, and the pastoral epistles, foresaw this dire peril to Christianity, and it's still here today, isn't it? In the 2nd century, it gave pure Christianity a gigantic struggle. The great Gnostics were the first Christian philosophers. and threatened to undermine the gospel message by deifying the devil. Deifying the devil and dethroning Christ. They were two kinds of Gnostics, both agreeing in the essential evil of matter. Both had trouble with the person of Jesus Christ, the literal, living, breathing person of Christ. God could not come down and live in flesh. They didn't believe that, but that's what the whole Bible teaches, isn't it? The Docetic Gnostics denied the actual humanity of Christ. The Docetic, D-O-C-E-T-I-C, Docetic Gnostics denied the actual humanity of Christ, and the Cerinthian, C-E-R-I-N-T-H-I-A-N, Gnostics distinguished between the man Jesus and the Eon. Eon means the eternal Christ. That came on him at his baptism and left him at the cross. Now here is the same things that the Jehovah's Witnesses are teaching today. This is nothing new. It happened way back then. And it's heresy then and it's heresy today. If there's books in the New Testament that are written against Jehovah's Witnesses, it is the Gospel of John, the book of Revelation, and 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Directly. John went after them like a mad dog. Some practiced asceticism and some licentiousness. They thought everything the Christian science, no. Hear no evil, see no evil, think no evil, speak no evil, all this kind of stuff, and evil won't exist. All right? They're aesthetics. They stay away from it. They deny everything. They live in a monastery, basically, or a monastic life. And then we have licentiousness. Since Christ, Bob George.
Oh, my.
Bob George. Jesus Christ forgive you of all sins, so just go on and live the way you want to live, because Christ died for them anyway. Just go on. Nothing wrong with it. Christ died for them. Licentiousness. John opposes both classes in his epistle. They claim superior knowledge, gnosis, and so were called Gnostics, Gnostikoi. 9 times John gives tests for knowing the truth and uses the verb gnosko, to know. Each time, 2, 3, 5, 3, or 2, 3, and 5, 3, 16, 3, 19, 3, 24, and 4, 2, 4, 6, and 4, 13, and 5 and 2. Some of the leaders he calls Antichrist. That's pretty strong, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I tell you what, today, Jehovah's Witnesses are Antichrists. They are Antichrists. Really, they call themselves Jehovah's Witnesses, and they are fighting against Jehovah God. Because they are dethroning Christ, and Jesus Christ is Jehovah. There are stories about John's dread of Cerinthius and his unwillingness to be seen in the same public bath with him. And in this little book that I just showed you a while ago, when he came upon the bath, he stuck his head in there and he saw Cerinthius, and he said, "Let's get out of here, kids, children, get out of here. God is liable to cause this roof to fall on this bath, and we don't want to be here when it does. Let's get out of here." The apostle of love, as he is a real son of thunder when it comes to hating Gnosticism. Westcott and Hort thinks that the 4th gospel was written to prove the deity of Christ. Westcott and Hort believes that the 4th gospel was written to prove the deity of Christ, assuming his humanity. And Westcott and Hort, while 1 John was written to prove the humanity of Christ, assuming his deity. As plain as it can be. Certainly both ideas appear in both books. The book is written to what? What are most of the New Testament letters written to? Churches. All right, it's written to churches. We're going to see that. Talks about the elect lady, so on and so forth. The date of the epistles. The time seems to considerably be removed from the atmosphere of the Pauline and Petrine epistles. Jerusalem has been destroyed. It's done over. That's after 70 A.D. If John wrote the 4th gospel by AD 95, then the first epistle could have come anywhere from 85 to 95. So this is before that. And of course, the book of Revelation was probably the last book. All right? Somewhere almost close to 100 A.D. just right before he was returned back to Ephesus. All right? The tone of the author is that of an old man. His urgent message that the disciples, his little children, love one another is like another story about the aged John who, when too feeble to stand, would sit in his chair and preach little children love one another. See, this is in history. This repeats itself over and over again. All right. Now, let's get to the book. In my little writing.
That's just like the old country preacher that kept preaching the same thing, and somebody asked him, why are you preaching the same thing? Because you ain't heard it yet.
You haven't put it in practice yet. I'll preach the same thing until you learn it.
Before you start, I'd like to make a comment.
Yes, brother.
Once upon a time, you could write clearly.
Yes. That's before 12 years of seminary and taking all those notes. Now, after you go, part of the book was lost. All right? The later part of the book was lost. I had to recopy it about 6 or 7 years later. But my handwriting was still a lot better then than it is now. This part of this book I had to write about 10 years ago. And that part of it is, my handwriting is not near so good. Okay? Now, this is what I say. The writer is John the Apostle, 85 to 95 A.D. John was old when he wrote this letter. According to tradition, John had already been tortured many times. He had suffered many things for the cause of Christ. By the way, one thing I forgot to tell you, that he had been exiled to the Isle of Patmos, but he had also supposedly been boiled in oil. Oh. And God miraculously protected him like he did the Hebrew children in the fire and Daniel in the lion's den. John had been poisoned also. John was no stranger to the suffering for the cause of Christ. The Gospel of John and his first epistles are so identical, we can see the same God-inspired mind dealing with the same problems in both books. John was a dove, gentle, loving man, but when it comes to false doctrine, this, like Gnosticism, raised its ugly head. He became one of the true sons of thunder. The Gnostics thought that they had a superior understanding of the Scriptures far above anyone else. The Gnostics deified Satan and dethroned Christ and thought that he was a good man or an angel. Isn't that what the Jehovah's Witnesses teach today? And the Unitarians? Doing a special job. John put the deity back in Christ and put Satan where he belonged and called these people the Gnostics know-it-alls, and the Greek word is gnosko, and the Antichrist, which they were and are today. Modern-day Gnostics and cults like Armstrong's Church of God, the Mormons, and Jehovah's Witnesses #1 are the modern Gnostics of today. No matter what you call them, by whatever name, they're still Gnostics. They dethrone Christ and do away with the salvation of God. Now let's look and see what John says about it. Let's see what John directly said. All right? The Word of Life. This is a Nestle Allen text, by the way. You know, I can read my modern stuff better than I can this. Whole. Ake Kahomen. Whole. Udrakamen. Toys. Optomois. Himon. Whole. Ethos. Metha. Kai. He. Keres. Himon. Epsal La Theson. Peri. Tu. Logu. Tes. Zoes. Could you read that better than my other? Now the next one is a little bit different because I started, well, you don't have it. I have it. In color, it's written in red, so I know where the Greek is and where the other is. I wrote it in different colors. All right. Oh, you know what? I missed the whole line.
Missed the whole line.
I missed the whole line. Ho, ain, op. Arcase. Ho. Okay. All right, so let's get back up there. Mine is written up so much that I can't see it. Yours is in a lot better shape than mine. I apologize. I missed the whole first line. It's which, that ho there is which. It's a relative pronoun. And it means which or who. Ain. Third person singular and perfect indicative active. We see this in John 1:1, don't we? In arche, ain, ho logos. So here we have ho, ain, op. Arcase. Which or who was, kept on being, continued to be forever from the arcase. Op, it comes from oppo, doesn't it? That's in the oblative case. Oblative, singular, feminine, because it's way back there. Arcase is the absolute furthest extremity of eternity past. When only God was there. John 1:1 and 1 John 1:1 are the same. There it is. NRK. All right, NRK. And this one here is from up or oppo arcase. All right, and the word is arcase there. It's just you've got a eta and a sigma because that's in the oblative case, isn't it? Oblative singular. Now in John 1:1, it's in arche. Here it is oppo arcase. From the beginning, still singular. This is locative, singular, feminine, first declension word. Okay? There's 3 declensions in Greek, by the way. First, second, third declension. It's real complicated, but I'm introducing to you one little micro, small piece of it at a time. So it doesn't confuse you or confound you, okay? Nor founder you.
I studied that this week, and it's complicated.
Yes, it is. All right. In arche, in beginning, kept on being the whole logos. Who is the logos?
Jesus.
Jesus or Jehovah. What does Jehovah mean?
You shall become.
All right, the word logos. That is a Hebrew idiom. It is not Greek. It is a Hebrew idiom. All right? That is the unspeakable name of God.
Is that
All
the
right.
same word that's used in John 1:1?
Yes, we're going to see that later on. All right, beautiful. John still got the same subject there. It is God the Son. Jehovah in flesh. Jehovah God, he who shall become, became flesh. John, the Gospel of John, talks about the God of heaven, the person of the visible God that you see, which is Jehovah. Jehovah means what, Dakota? Jehovah. He who shall become. All right? He who shall become. What does that name mean? Jehovah. It's a promise in it, isn't it? The promise means that God shall become. God shall become what? You read the book of Ruth, and you read the law, and it tells us that only a related person can redeem you if you're in trouble. So God had to be related to us to redeem us. Isn't that beautiful? And God did not think it wrong to become man so he could redeem us from our sins. Now the Gospel of John talks about the God person, the God, Jehovah, walking around in human flesh. But there, he's showing him in the Gospel of John as deity. Absolute. Walking in flesh, but deity. 1 John, the Gnostic says that the eon came upon Christ at his baptism and left at the cross. That's the eternal one. It came upon them, otherwise he's just a man. Some of them says that there was no man at all, but it was an angel. What did the Jehovah's Witnesses teach? And I hate to use that term because they are not Jehovah's Witnesses. They are Antichrist, as John called them. But they say they're Jehovah's Witnesses, but they are Antichrist. They're anti-Jehovah. Jehovah means he who shall become. When God became flesh, What verse in the Bible can you prove to me that God became flesh? You've got to have that verse.
John 1:14.
John 1:14. What's it say in Greek?
Kai,
hologos, sarx, ageneto. All right, you know that. That's good. You need to know that. Write that over here in the column someplace. John 1:14. All right? And Kai and hologos and the Jehovah, flesh, sarx means flesh. He became, third person singular. Aorist, indicative, middle voice. God brought himself from eternity into space and time in the person of Jesus Christ. He was really a person that lived and walked and breathed and that died on the cross of Calvary and that rose again forever. Sunday is the Easter, you know. That celebrates the resurrection, the Anastasia. By the way, I brought Anastasia with me tonight. Did you see Anastasia out there in the parking lot?
Yeah.
Anastasia. That's the name of that car, Anastasia. That car sat on the side of a canal bank for 38 years, and I resurrected it.
That's my daughter's
Anastasia. Really? Anastasia.
She goes by Stacia.
Stacia. Well, the Russian princess Anastasia was, her name means the resurrection. Russian is directly out of Greek. Anastasia means resurrection. All right. Which kept on being. He kept on being from the beginning. He continued to exist forever in eternity past. Isn't that beautiful? Third person singular, imperfect, indicative, active. The imperfect tense, something that continues on and on and on and on. From the beginning, archais, oblative, singular, feminine. Ho, which, or who, a relative pronoun, nominative, singular, masculine, by the way. Aku a komen. We have heard. God is appealing to the apostles' sense of, are there five senses? What are the five senses?
Taste, touch, smell,
Feel.
sight,
Sight and
hearing.
All right. So what do you think he's trying to do here? He's trying to prove that Jesus walked. God walked in flesh. We touched him. We heard him. We saw him. We smelled him. We tasted the fish that he handed to us from his hands. They tasted the sweat off of his brow. Probably the blood of the cross that was splattered on him. Five senses. Our brains are like computers. They are our souls. This computer is our souls. God's communication to us is through our five senses, and those five senses are like the keyboard to that computer. Okay? They are the link. They are that link. Our minds, our souls are like a radio. God's Word is like a broadcast on a certain frequency that we tune into. Okay? We understand, we see through our senses. These apostles were eyewitnesses. Luke was a physicist and a doctor and a scientist of his time. He uses words high and far beyond. He wrote the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. And he uses words, and he calls himself an expert witness. In a court of law, if they call an expert witness in, what does that expert witness? He knows what he's talking about, doesn't he? In a court of law, an eyewitness is a very important witness, isn't he? That's proof. When you see something with your eyes and you hear it with your ears, you touch it, you feel it, you taste it, you smell it, you're an eyewitness. You're qualified. John says we are qualified because we heard him speak. We know that he was human. Here we have God in the flesh. We have heard him first person plural. Second perfect. All right, comes from akuo. First person plural, second perfect. Perfect tense. We have heard him. Who's we here? The apostles and the early church. We have heard him. Which or who we have what? Eurakomen. First person plural. Perfect. All right? We have seen him. He's appealing to the five senses, isn't he? We heard, we see. And then it says, tois, ophthalmos, with the eyes. He puts it, I mean, he really gets definite here, Brother Harold. He says, we saw him with our own eyes. With our eyes, ophthalmos, ophthalmologist comes from this word, ophthalmos. With the eyes of us. Thank you, brother. With the eyes of us, himo. That's genitive plural, first personal pronoun. Which or who, relative pronoun, nominative, singular, masculine. Ethosomen, which we beheld, first person plural, first aorist indicative. Which we beheld with our eyes, first aorist, what is that? First aorist, second aorist. Remember what the aorist tense is? Aorist. This is very important. That's why I'm writing it on the board. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother you with it. You need to memorize this one. First aorist, punctiliar action. Second aorist, punctiliar action, but with just a little more duration. We beheld him with our eyes. When? During his personal stay on the earth, when God became flesh, when God broke out from eternity into space and time in the person of Jesus Christ. That's very important. Space and time in the person of Jesus Christ. With the eyes, which we beheld, kai, and the hands, hai keres, the hands of us. We touched. With our hands, we touched him. We heard him. We touched him. We saw him. Do you think he's real, Sister Andina? They did. Do you think Jesus was he really Jehovah in the flesh? John says he was. He's not a figment or imagination. He wasn't some spirit. Jehovah's Witnesses said at the resurrection, they don't know what happened to him. Whether his body dissolved or turned into mist and went away, they don't know what happened to it. What does the Bible say happened to Jesus' body? Anastasia. It rose.
He went to the tomb and then he rose.
That's right, he rose. We touched Perry concerning of to the Word. In John 1:1 it says, in arche ho logos. In beginning kept on being the Word. All right? The Word. Who is the Word?
Jesus Christ.
Jehovah.
Jehovah. God. That's who it is. We touched Jehovah. And we lived. Forever. Isn't that beautiful? You know, no man ever saw God, it said in the end time, but now it says we saw him. Not only did we see him, we touched him. We heard him.
These God is deaders. For them, God is truly dead.
Yes.
But not for us.
No. To the Jehovah's Witnesses, to the cause, God is dead. God never came down in flesh. Jehovah's Witnesses say, well, Michael the archangel, Michael means he who is like God. So Michael came down, he walked among us and told us about God's will. Hogwash. God loved us and he came down and walked among us to redeem us, to save us from our sins. To save us. The word tes zoes. The word from which all life comes. The word from which all life comes. Genesis 1:1. Barashith bara. In beginnings created Elohim. Et hashemayim ve'et haaretz. In one of the beginnings created Elohim, the Creator, the heavens and the earth. And it says, in the earth she became formless and void. And then it says, Spirit God. time Spirit God visited His creation. Where did the creation come from? That's right. It came from Spirit God. Where did the original creation of God, when God created it way back here, in time when He created spirits and angels and everything else, God held everything in solution in His Spirit, in Spirit God. Ruach Elohim, in Spirit God. Not the Spirit of God, but Spirit God. And He brought it forth. Jesus Christ beat it out in Hebrew, formed it according to His pattern. Isn't that beautiful? And the pattern maker visited His creation. Isn't that beautiful? And Spirit God hovered over it and worried over and mourned over the destruction of His creation. And Jehovah came down and visited His creation and the creatures to redeem all of it. Isn't that beautiful? That's different than the story of the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Unitarians, and whoever else.
And some of the translators of the Bible.
Yeah. Isn't that beautiful?
Oh.
How much more beautiful is it that God loves man so much that He became man, that He could redeem us.
Then where it says in Genesis, and the Spirit of God brooded over the waters.
Spirit God worried over, suffered over, brooded over. It's a term of pain. When God saw His creation destroyed, it hurt Him. When man fell in the Garden of Eden, it hurt God. And it really hurt Him on the cross of Calvary and prior to that. Jesus paid the cost. God paid the cost in flesh. Just think about it. God took the beating that we deserved. Didn't He? God took the beating. Again, we have no sin upon us when we're born again. There is no sin upon you at all. There's sin in you because we sin. And that is our triune nature. What part of you sins? Draw this little
Body
pattern.
part.
We have soul, which our mind is in. We have body. And we have spirit. This is beautiful. The spirit that we are born with is the spirit of death. When we're born again, that spirit is run off. And we have the deposit of the Holy Spirit of God, our Spirit God, living in us forevermore. Isn't that beautiful? The body, the Adamic nature. Kakos in Greek. Okay? Kakos. And John's going to get into that word. This is the Adamic nature. This is Adamic evil. That Adamic evil, that Adamic nature is in our body. It stays there. God makes no provision for the flesh. The flesh is not going to live forever. It has to be either changed in the rapture, or it has to die and be resurrected a brand new form. There's no provision. It's not going to live forever. The body isn't. It's got to be changed in the rapture, or it's got to die and go to the grave and be resurrected as a new, in sync body with that of God. There is no provision. Your body gives you so much trouble because it never will be lined up with the Spirit. It's because it's changed. There's nothing wrong with you because you want sin. That's the nature of hell that was in you. But the only good thing about it is that spirit of disobedience is no longer there. The Spirit of God is that which makes you want to do God's will. We've only got into one verse so far. But I hope you got an introduction to this book. This is a powerful book. and it is one of the most important books in the Bible. Gospel of John is important. Revelation is important. When I finish these 3 books, I will have done all of John's writing, and I'm going to tell you something, that's the most important writing in the world today. John's writing. The other books are important. They are paramountly important. But in the world that we live in today, we need to know about John's God. Because this is the God that the world is denying. This is the Redeemer that loved us enough to come down and waller around in this world with us to redeem us and bring us back to Him. Colossians 1:14-16, Genesis 1 and 1 and 2, all the way down to 1:26, John 1:1-8. All of this cross-reference to this one verse. And we just got started. It's going to be a wonderful book. And I think we give it a start today. We'll start off with John 1 and 2 next week. Do you have any questions? Any questions? Well, was it worth looking at? What a book. Well, my handwriting was better, so you don't have to suffer quite so much. Well, let's be dismissed, and I'm going to turn you loose on the world. Go out and do something eternal this week. Brother Harold, thank you so much for leading the singing tonight. It really sets our heart in tune with God. Would you dismiss us in prayer, please, brother?
Father, thank you for this time of studying your word, and we thank you for the enlightenment that you give us through our brother, and we ask you that you would continue to bless us as we continue to study in 1 John. Be with those of us who are ill. Lord, touch our children. If any come to know you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Sticking your feet down a little bit, huh?
The song came to my mind.
Fall asleep, huh?
No,
Which one?
back.
There is a Redeemer, Jesus Christ.
Mr. Jim Phillips, how are you doing?
All right, brother.
So, this question.
Another one came to my mind. Down from His splendor and glory.